Appreciate it. Thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? Barely? Can we take it up? You good now? Good? Thumbs up, kind of? Okay, cool. This is our agenda for today. We won't beat that up. This is me really quickly. Like if you're asking why do I talk about this, I built 3 or 4 SOCs now. I was recently at Microsoft. I'm at Oracle now. And so we've built a SOC and we've grown SOCs a few different ways. I've done a SOC from scratch with Dell Securix and KeyBank. And I worked in this, I'm also a soldier, or was a soldier in the United States Army Reserve in the Cyber Protection Center out here in Moon for about 9 years. So that's my background. I would like to highlight that the fun fact at the bottom, Ohio is the greatest state. We can talk about it later. We can get into a debate. Boo, I understood. Yeah, that's okay. So what is a SOC? Most of you probably have an idea of a SOC in your head, right? Like you think, I know what Security Operations Center is. It's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and this is how it works. But it's actually, if you look at COBIT, NIST, ISO, anything like that, they will not define a SOC. It's not there. Try it. Google it. Look for it. What they actually define is your incident handling process. So you have this tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 mentality, and it's actually broken into just the mindset. That's a task org where you're seeing on your guys' stuff, and it's actually an incident handling process. So the way to do this is to understand your mission. And the only way to understand your mission is to understand your hire's mission. So I'm an Army guy, so we look at hire headquarters mission and we break it down to our mission. That's how we do it. And it keeps going all the way down. So if you're in a big organization, you probably have a dedicated security operations center, right? Tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You may have a smaller, if you're in a smaller org, you might have just 1 or 2 people and they rotate through. And that'll be on the next slide. But you need to understand what your left and right limits are in terms of mission, because there's going to be teams out there that do pieces of, let's say, IAM, or they do OffSec, or they do digital forensics. But at a certain level, when the shit hits the fan, they're all incident handlers, right? Because they all belong to the blue team. So you need to know your mission, your organization's mission, and then you also need to know your company's mission and how those all tie together. It'll allow you to drive your mission all the way through, because you'll be able to say, our mission says this. And so it's important. So what does your SOC look like today? This is what a lot of SOCs look like. This is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. You also see some SOCs that have a disjointed, or like they share resources. That happens all the time. And one of the things that you need to understand is when do you click that in? When do you start sharing resources? Your triage, your tier 1, typically that's what people think of a SOC. They think of this 12-man team, 24/7 operations, an MSSP, contractors all involved, and that's it. But it actually goes all the way up to the tier 3. You can go all the way up to your CISO. Your CISO can be part of your SOC, but it's really your incident handling process that you need to think about. There's also a thing called a round robin, which was really popular in the early aughts and in the 90s, and it's still prevalent today. If you're in a smaller company, you'll take a cell phone and you'll pass it around. You'll be like, hey, you do it this week, and the next week you got it, and the week after that you got it. That's awesome. If that's what you have to do and you're making it work, great. But I'll tell you this way, if you probably don't have the experience to triage everything by yourself, you're always going to end up bringing in more resources if you do it that way. So just something to think about, hey, maybe we need to dedicate some people to that. And this is the kind of talk that'll get you there. So know your objectives and your constraints. There's a lot of stuff on this slide. I'm only going to focus on 3 or 4 of these things. One is the internal and external customer SLAs. You probably have contractual requirements, whether that be through regulatory reasons or maybe you have a contractual obligation to a customer that you set. Just know what those SLAs are, because if you don't know them, you won't be able to build your other metrics off of them. This is a really metrics-driven talk to define how you guys are going to staff. So super important. The other one there on the right is your budget. If you wonder you say, hey, I need 12 people, but I only have 6, the budget's why that is, and you need to find some other ways to work around it. And we'll talk about how you can justify getting more headcount, or just explaining to leadership what happens if you don't have the headcount that goes with it in a couple seconds. But the real big thing is, I was an IC before I was a manager. I'm a director now, but I'm a big fan of work-life balance. And your employees, or if you're ICs in the group here, you want your leadership to think about work-life balance all the time. The worst thing for me is to how do I get more time to myself and my family out of work? So we always trying to hone that in and find the balance. And so something we want to touch on too. We'll go into depth here in a second. This is a lot of text to read, but the biggest things to look at here is how many cases do you get in a day? What's the severity in those cases? how is your SOC going to connect to the network and work those cases? This is important when they're talking about things like on-call or follow the sun or MSSPs. And then how do you set up your schedule? So most commonly, we'll talk about 4x8, 5x8, 410s, and 223, and other stuff here in a second. But I have some slides on that. But really quickly, those are the key points here to talk about when you're building your staff plan. And then what do you do during a major incident? You probably have an incident handling policy at your company. It's written out, it's stuffed in a box someplace, and you're like, we'll use that when it's a big deal. But you hardly ever test it. When I find companies, like, they don't do a walkthrough, they don't do a simulation or parallel test, they've never gone through it, and they haven't said, like, really, take your SOC out of the picture. If you haven't done a coup or done any type of disaster recovery, like, just take your SOC out of the picture. Take your tier 1 and put them in a box and be like, nope, you don't participate. How does it work now? Test that out, and that's important to highlight too. So let's just talk about how do we get those numbers. There's 2 ways we can get the case coverage metrics, and we can take your cases. Now, if you don't have a case management system like Jira, ServiceNow, RSA, whatever your tooling is, you can take these from your IDS. You can take them straight from your EDR solution. You can gather these up a few different ways. But most people work a 40-hour work week, or they try to. And so that gives us 2,400 minutes in a work week. And so we need to divide out that time. So most of you are probably aware that you don't work 100% of the time at work. If you do, let me know how you do it. I'm interested. So 60% is actually realistic. 75% is a really easy way to justify it if you need to sell it. But say, hey, I have 4 analysts. That's 1,800 minutes times 4. And then divide that by the number of cases you have in a week. That's like 15 minutes to triage and work every case to closure. Does that sound realistic? Some cases, yeah, it does. It's super easy. Some cases, it's not possible. So think about that when you're justifying. Now, that one number won't stand alone. You need other numbers, so we're going to keep going. So the other way to do this is to take the number of cases you have and then times them by the median TTR. That's total time to resolve for me, but total time to close for you maybe, whatever your metric might be. If that doesn't work out, take that number, whatever that number is, and then divide it by 1,500, or by 1,800, which is the amount of work you're going to do in a week, and you end up with the amount of analysts you need to work your current caseload. If that number is less than you currently have, how do you do it? That's the question I would ask. Like, that means you're either auto-closing a bunch of cases, which is totally fine, just remove those numbers, and you get a more realistic number, or you're overworked, in which case you're letting things drop to the floor, which sometimes comes back to budget. You have to do. You have to prioritize. When we're talking about when do we work, this is important too. We'll talk in another couple slides about like the scheduling methods. How do you decide when do you work? If you're running an incident handling team, when do your analysts work? Traditionally in America, right, like 9 to 5. That's a really common one. Everyone says, oh, we work 9 to 5. That's a really common. Everyone wants that schedule. But is that best for your company? What if your company's in Pittsburgh? Your company is in the West Coast, but you actually have your SOC on the East Coast. Does it make sense to have East Coast hours, 9 to 5? It doesn't. Keep West Coast hours. So when you have a global company, you have to like think about this in a different way. What if you've outsourced your tier 1 and you put them in India or in Romania, and then you look back and you're like, well, we all work PST hours, so then the hours need to look different. So kind of think about that. And it's really easy to get these graphs, by the way. This histogram is just to take your auth logs and then just count by unique user by day. And then just graph it by hours, by minute by hours. And you'll get down to this like type of chart, and you'll be able to say, this is how many people are logging in on a regular basis. And it gives you the idea of how many, when the activity in your organization actually is picking up. Another thing to touch on real quick is when you're thinking about on-call capabilities, there's technology that will enable you to do that, right? You probably have PagerDuty, ServiceNow, some type of integration. Some companies don't have that. You may need to invest in that technology to do this. That's okay. Also, when you're talking about on-call, if you're moving to an on-call model, we'll touch on social tax here in a second, but if you're moving to an on-call model for like your company's growing or you're hiring more people, you want to be more advanced in security, one of the things you can't do is change the deal on people without communicating. So if I work a 9 to 5 and you come in and say, hey, Chris, now you need to work midnight to 8 a.m. and oh, by the way, you're going to be on call and you never did that before. You need to socialize that with me. And sometimes for some people, that's not going to work. So then you get this rub of like, is this going to work out for both parties, the organization and the employee? So this is just a really quick one for you. On-call coverage. If your SLA gap, if your SLA for your detections is bigger than your gap, you're not going to meet SLA. This should be common sense, right? But some people don't think of it like this, don't think of it like break it down. And that's if you have on-call capability, you don't have to worry about that. So 24/7 ops is really common if you're trying to follow the sun or do something like that. But one of the things you may not think of is that some people have OOB networks or air gap networks that they can't connect to. You don't have an on-call method there. There's no way to remote in. So now you have to think like, hey, I have to connect, so I can't have that 16/7. I actually really do need to staff a 24/7 team to do incident handling. So how does that work? So always think about connectivity, zero trust, and how you're going to VPN in and get to your guys' tickets. A lot of things out there nowadays are awesome. Teams has integration, Slack has integration. We have chat ops that does awesome stuff. So how does that work for you? And on-call is important. Scheduling. So like I said, most people work 5x8. So I'll tell you that's 260 work days a year. I'm a big fan of 410s. It's that sweet spot in between. And it's 208 work days a year. That sounds, I mean, just really clear. That's 50 days off, more for every employee. That's great. That's awesome. But it is striking a balance. That is a 10-hour work day. Most people will say after 6 hours they're not being super productive. At least that's the metric they use to like try to justify having a shorter work week. You can go to a small, if you want even fewer days, you can go to something called Pittman or 223 or Panama schedule, which I'm sure people have heard about. It's a 2 on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off, 2 on, 3 off. That sounds confusing. There's a chart. Okay, I promise you. But you can do it if you want. I will tell you this, it all goes to that social tax. If you want to switch your team from a 5x8 to a 410, just socialize it, make sure it works. 410 sounds really sexy to a lot of people, like, oh yeah, 4 days a week, that's great. But some people have to put their kids on and off the bus. Some people have to do other things. Just keep it in mind when you do that. You may have not signed up for that for everybody, and you may have to pay the social tax of normalizing it with your teams. And it's work-life balance, so try to get it right. Staffing is important, and this will enable you to do that. If you plan this out right, you'll know exactly how many people you need when you're doing staffing, and it'll allow you to say, I need XYZ people so I can actually get this done. Follow the sun. It's just really straightforward. If you want a 24/7 SOC, you don't want people to work at night, you want to keep that work-life balance really you think working during the day is the best, and that's when people are most productive, follow the sun works. It's also probably cheaper for you. If you can do follow the sun, this works. Just look at the cost of living. It's broken down right there, by country. This is a way to do it. Not saying do it this way, because everyone has their own requirements. Everything here is like a, how do you want to do it? It depends talk. The cons here, there is cultural barriers. There's going to be times when you are communicating. I have teams that work in the UK, and you'd think that the UK and America are as close as you can get in terms of cultural barriers. Nope, tons of things that are different. And it happens all the time. For example, to give notice in the US, it's typically 2 weeks, right? In the UK, it can go anywhere from a month to 3 months. So how do you staff a team like that? It takes a long time. Loss of connectivity, continuity during handoffs. If you have these handoffs and they're contingent on hours across the world, things happen. Another thing to think about is holidays. For example, like holidays match up in different places. How do you do coverage on holidays with different countries? It's a lot harder to schedule when you're not keeping on top of it. So just adds a layer of complexity if you try to do follow the sun. And then there's MSSPs or contracting. You just buy a service. Like, hey, you're going to monitor this for XYZ, and that's going to work. Sure, it works. You get to leverage all the new technology stacks or your own internal stack, depending on how you do it. There are some good things there. Just keep in mind, too, that you're relying on an external party. That's a factor. There's contractual challenges that typically cost just as much, if not more, to use an MSSP than staffing your own people. But this gets into this core versus context. Thanks. This core versus context. And one of the things there is, like, if your company makes printers, you probably don't have a lot of core in cybersecurity. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. So contextually, it makes a lot of sense to outsource your cybersecurity to another company, and that just makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about staffing and reporting the degradation. This happens all the time. I see it. So we use an example up here that it's a 24/7 team that uses 410s. You have to have an on-call. Where on-call is not an option, and they have a 4-hour SLA. So just have this chart handy. Just bust out something like this for your team. Say at 12 people, we are operating on tier 1, completely efficient. We have all the things covered, all the shifts are covered, we have fault tolerance, we're good. Like someone can take a vacation, a birthday, take a day off, it's all good. At 7 to 11, one of those shifts doesn't have fault tolerance, okay? Doesn't matter which one it is. In yellow, so then we go to red, and it says anything under 6, you've lost coverage somewhere. If you have that 4-hour SLA, you're missing coverage. You're missing the mark as a company. What I will see happen all the time is they'll say, hey, I only have 10 people for headcount, but I need 12. But they say, well, we only have 10 people, so I'm green. I've hired all my people, we're green. They're actually yellow. Or they're red. I've seen it go down as that far too. Oh, all I have is 6 headcount, but I need 12. All the shifts are covered, so I'm good. No. What that ends up being is this. So like, hey, I need you to come in on Friday, man. Someone has a vacation, they're taking it off. Or hey, someone's sick, I need you to come in and do some work. Or hey, this is an incident, I need you to come in and work on your day off. No, you need a staff so that people can actually take time off. And so this is what, if you end up doing those watermelon metrics, which is it's green on the outside and red on the inside, this is what ends up happening. And I know we're almost out of time here. These are things I wish we had more time to talk about. I'm trying to get in and out of here so you guys can get this talk and get on the move. But training's important, burnout's important, and imposter syndrome is important. I will tell you this, if you're in this talk right now and you think I have imposter syndrome, there's the Dunning-Kruger curve in the bottom right. Probably really hard to see for you guys in the back, but if you're here, you're in the valley of, at least, if you're not on the far right, you're in the valley of despair, which means you don't know something and you're here to learn. So thanks for coming. Next year, I hope you get the chance to give your own talk because it's really not that hard to put a talk together, especially a 20-minute talk. Please come out next year and give a talk yourself. Any questions?
Hi, thanks. Great talk.
Yeah.
Do you have any recommendations for tools to help manage a schedule?
To manage what?
A schedule.
Yeah, so actually you can use, so this is the way I do it, which is you can use collinear and war tools, which is a Python module. And you can put in all your constraints, and then you can put all your employees' preferences in, and then it'll dump out your schedule for you. Yeah, so I wrote it. I can try to share it, but welcome to have at it. There's other professional tools you can pay for that'll do it too. So I just didn't want to pay. So.
Any more questions?
Cool. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate it.
Thank you.